The smell of onions sizzling in a cast iron pan, collard greens simmering for hours, and the sweetness of a homemade sweet potato pie, these weren't just meals, they were history and love. Before we begin, hit like and subscribe. Today we revisit 12 African American recipes worth remembering. In countless Southern kitchens, smothered pork chops were more than dinner. They were a lesson in turning little into plenty. Popularized during the Great Migration, this dish reflected the creativity of black families who knew how to stretch modest ingredients into something that felt luxurious. Thick bone-in chops were seasoned with salt, pepper, paprika, and garlic, dredged lightly in flour and fried golden in a sizzling cast iron pan. But the real magic came after onions and peppers deglazed the skillet, transforming pan drippings into a rich, velvety gravy. The chops were tucked back in, left to simmer low and slow until the meat fell off the bone. Served with white rice, mashed potatoes, or cabbage, it fed large families while carrying the taste of love and resilience. Many elders remember waiting for that first bite gravy dripping over the plate, the kind of flavor no seasoning packet could ever match. Smothered pork chops weren't just comfort food, they were proof that with patience, even scraps could be turned into soul. Long before superfoods were trendy, collard greens were already at the center of African American kitchens. Their roots stretch back to West Africa, where leafy greens were cooked daily with spices and meats. In the American South, collards became more than food. They symbolized prosperity, health, and family unity. Traditionally simmered with ham hocks or fatback, later generations leaned towards smoked turkey necks, which gave the same deep, smoky flavor with a lighter touch. Preparing them was no quick task. Greens had to be washed carefully, sometimes 3 or 4 times before being chopped and added to a bubbling pot with onions, garlic, red pepper flakes, and vinegar. Hours of slow cooking turned the leaves tender, while the broth, lovingly called pot liquor, became a prized tonic sopped up with cornbread. On New Year's Day, collards promised wealth for the year ahead, each green leaf standing for money. Elders still remember the steam fogging up kitchen windows and the smell filling every corner of the house. Collard greens weren't just a side dish, they were nourishment for both body and spirit, a tradition linking generations at every Sunday table. No holiday table in a black household felt complete without a sweet potato pie, and it wasn't just dessert, it was heritage. Brought over through African foodways, sweet potatoes became a Southern staple, sweeter and more abundant than pumpkin. Unlike pumpkin pie, which filled white American kitchens, sweet potato pie reflected African American taste, warm, spiced, and comforting. The potatoes were roasted until their natural sugars deepened, then mashed smooth with eggs, brown sugar, vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes a hint of citrus zest. The crust, often homemade, had to be golden and flaky, holding the custard-like filling without overshadowing it. Tradition dictated that the first slice went to the eldest, a gesture of respect and legacy. Younger generations often added marshmallows or pecans on top, but the classic version was left plain, glossy from egg wash. Many recall sneaking into the kitchen the next morning to eat a cold slice with coffee, the flavors even richer overnight. Sweet potato pie was never just food, it was memory on a plate, a matriarch's signature, and a reminder that love could be measured in spices and shared in every bite. Few dishes brought people together like a summertime fish fry, and fried catfish was always the star. Abundant in southern rivers and inexpensive to catch catfish became a staple for families looking to stretch a dollar while still serving something festive. The preparation was simple, but sacred fillets soaked briefly in buttermilk to soften their flavor, dredged in seasoned cornmeal with paprika, cayenne, and garlic powder, then slipped into bubbling peanut oil. The crackle of the fryer, the smell rising into the humid air, and the sight of golden crust forming were signals that everyone's appetite would soon be satisfied. Served with Crystal or Louisiana hot sauce, a slice of white bread, and maybe coleslaw or baked beans, it was both practical and celebratory. Family reunions, church gatherings, or backyard weekends often centered around a giant tub of fish, with elders swapping stories while kids ran with paper plates in hand. Leftovers never lasted long. Cold catfish sandwiches with mustard were a prized treat the next day. Fried catfish wasn't just a meal, it was a community tradition, proof that joy could be fried, golden, and shared by hand. In African American kitchens, Hoppin' John was never just beans and rice. It was a dish of symbolism, luck, and survival. With roots tracing back to West Africa and the Gullah Geechee culture of the Carolina coast, this simple mixture of black-eyed peas, rice, and pork scraps carried deep meaning. On New Year's Day, families gathered around steaming bowls of Hoppin' John, with each pea representing coins, and the greens served alongside, symbolizing paper money together, promising prosperity for the year ahead. But beyond the holiday, it was an everyday dish of ingenuity. Black-eyed peas, inexpensive and easy to grow, stretched alongside rice to feed large households. A ham hock, or bits of bacon, provided richness, while onions, garlic, and bay leaves gave depth. Leftovers were transformed into skip and jenny the next day, proof that nothing went to waste, and frugality was itself a virtue. For many, the sound of peas simmering and the earthy aroma drifting through the house still recalls evenings of shared bowls and unspoken hope. Hoppin' John wasn't about extravagance. It was about taking what little you had and turning it into nourishment, both for the body and the spirit. At first glance, hoe cakes might look like simple cornmeal pancakes, but behind them lies a story of survival and ingenuity. The name itself comes from the method once used to cook them field workers. Many of them enslaved would spread the batter on the flat side of a hoe and cook it over an open flame in the fields. With nothing more than cornmeal, water, salt, and a bit of lard or bacon grease, hoe cakes provided sustenance when little else was available. As generations passed, the recipe evolved, sometimes enriched with buttermilk or eggs for a fluffier texture, but the spirit of resilience remained the same. In rural southern kitchens, hoe cakes were often paired with greens, beans, or stews used like bread to scoop up juices. Mornings began with the sizzle of batter hitting hot iron edges, crisping to golden brown, served with butter, honey, or syrup. Many elders recall how the smell filled the kitchen and how those warm cakes brought comfort at the start of a long day. Hoe cakes were never just breakfast. They were proof that with the barest of means, families could still create something warm, nourishing, and deeply rooted in tradition. This humble pairing of ham hocks and lima beans tells a story of turning scraps into sustenance. During the Jim Crow era, ham hocks, the joint between a pig's leg and foot, were often discarded by wealthier households, but in black kitchens they became prized. Smoked and simmered low and slow, a single hock could transform an entire pot of beans into something rich and hearty. Lima beans, cheap and filling, soaked up every ounce of smoky flavor, softening into a creamy texture that clung to the spoon. For many families in the 1942nd through the 1962nd, this dish was a weeknight miracle, affordable, nourishing, and satisfying enough to feed a crowd. Children remember the rhythmic bubbling from the stovetop and the savory aroma that lingered long after dinner. Leftovers were even better the next day, ladled over rice or scooped up with cornbread. Elders often said, "If you can season beans right, you'll never go hungry." Ham hocks and lima beans weren't fancy, but they carried dignity, proof that resilience and flavor could thrive even in the leanest times. Among the Gullah Geechee people of South Carolina and Georgia, red rice wasn't just a side dish, it was heritage on a plate. Closely related to West African jollof rice, this dish reflected the cultural bridge carried across the Atlantic. Long grain rice was sautéed in bacon fat or oil, then simmered with onions, bell peppers, garlic, and crushed tomatoes until the grains turned a deep brick red. Seasoned with thyme, cayenne, or celery seed, the rice gained bold flavor, and when available, smoked, sausage, chicken gizzards, or shrimp were added for richness. Families often prepared red rice for Sunday dinners, church gatherings, or birthdays, where the tomato base symbolized blessing and prosperity. Elders used to say that if your red rice came out too dry or too mushy, you weren't paying attention. This dish demanded care and intuition. The aroma filling the house and the bright color on the table made it more than food. It was celebration and memory bound together. Even today, red rice remains a treasured dish, proof that traditions preserved quietly over centuries can still speak loudly of identity, resilience, and pride. For many black families, especially during the Depression and wartime years, chicken and dumplings were a way to stretch a single bird into a feast. A whole chicken was simmered gently with onions, celery, garlic, bay leaf, and pepper until the meat was tender enough to pull from the bone. That rich broth then became the base for dumplings. Simple dough made of flour, fat, and milk, or water rolled thin and cut into strips or rounds. Some families preferred slick dumplings flat and chewy, while others favored puffed biscuit-like ones. No matter the style, the result was the same, a steaming pot of comfort that warmed both body and spirit. This wasn't restaurant food, it was survival food, grief food, celebration food, all in one. On cold nights, the bubbling pot on the stove filled the house with a smell that meant safety and care. Children, remember the anticipation of lifting the lid and seeing dumplings float among tender chicken pieces? Chicken and dumplings were more than just hearty. They were proof that even in lean times, love could be ladled into a bowl and shared around the table. Before refined white sugar became affordable, molasses was the sweetener of choice in many African American kitchens, and nowhere did it shine brighter than in gingerbread. Unlike the light, fluffy cakes of suburban cookbooks, this version was dense, moist, and deeply spiced. Molasses gave it a smoky sweetness layered with ginger, cloves, cinnamon, and allspice that filled the air as it baked. Often cooked in cast iron pans or well-worn metal trays, the cake carried the seasoned flavor of generations. Families made it during the fall and winter holidays, its rich aroma mingling with the smell of wood smoke or fresh coffee. Elders often recalled learning to make it without a written recipe, measuring by memory, knowing the batter was right when it hugged the spoon. Served warm with buttermilk or sliced cold the next morning, it was a treat that disappeared quickly, never lasting more than a day in most households. For many, a bite of molasses gingerbread meant comfort, tradition, and a reminder that sweetness wasn't always about sugar, it was about making the most of what you had. Once dismissed as scraps, oxtails were often left behind in butcher shops, too fatty, too bony, too tough for those who could afford prime cuts. But in African American kitchens, they were transformed into rich, unforgettable stews. The process began with searing the oxtails until browned and caramelized, locking in deep flavor. Then they were braised slowly with onions, garlic, tomato paste, broth, and seasonings like thyme, bay leaf, or even Scotch bonnet peppers where Caribbean influence was strong. Hours of cooking turned the meat silky and tender, while the marrow melted into the broth, thickening it with natural richness. This dish was rarely an everyday meal. It was a Sunday centerpiece, a symbol of love and effort. Families recall how the table grew quiet when the stew was served, not out of formality, but out of reverence for the dish itself. Paired with rice or buttered noodles, every bite felt luxurious, despite its humble beginnings. Oxtail stew was proof of culinary alchemy that even bones could be turned into legacy, and hardship could be transformed into nourishment worth remembering. Few dishes stir such strong reactions as chitlins, pig, intestines, cleaned, boiled, and seasoned until tender. For some, the smell alone brings back childhood memories. For others, it recalls hardship and survival. During slavery, enslaved Africans were often given the least desirable cuts: feet, ears, tails, and intestines, and through patience they transformed them into dishes of nourishment. Preparing chitlins was a labor of love, often taking hours of scrubbing, rinsing, and slow cooking with vinegar, onions, garlic, and spices to temper the odor. Many families had a chitlin queen, the elder who alone was trusted with the task. Traditionally served on holidays or at special gatherings, chitlins became a delicacy born from deprivation, a reminder of resilience and resourcefulness. Elders recall the kitchen windows fogging, the smell clinging to clothes, and the sense of occasion when the dish finally reached the table. To eat chitlins today is more than just tasting food. It's honoring history, preserving memory, and acknowledging a painful past that families turned into something sustaining. Whether loved or disliked, chitlins remain a cultural marker connecting generations through a dish both controversial and sacred. These 12 recipes weren't just food on a plate. They were pieces of memory, resilience, and love passed down through generations. From the savory richness of smothered pork chops to the challenging legacy of chitlins, each dish carried stories that spoke louder than words. They remind us how African American kitchens turned scraps into feasts and hardship into tradition. So which of these do you remember, or which one would you try first? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. And if you enjoyed this journey through flavors of the past, don't forget to like and subscribe for more nostalgic trips into America's culinary history, because some recipes are too important to be forgotten.